Today's episode is brought to you by FreedomProject Academy. Looking for a K-12 classical online school built on Judeo-Christian values? FPA is enrolling now for the fall. Request your free information packet at freedomforschool.com. That's freedom, F-O-R, school.com.
It's time to get educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Dr. Duke, joined by Miss Katie Petrick. And before we get started, you gotta hit that share button. We've been telling you, we want to educate more people than you, so don't be selfish. All right, we start with a look at the explosion of mental illness and the number of people who now identify as LGBTQ in America. How did we get here, and what does it mean when Bill Maher, of all people, is even telling the left to just stop the insanity? Look, I mean, we've had an explosion of people. It's interesting, isn't it, that now that we're teaching sexuality and homosexuality and trans ideology to 5 and 7 and 9 and 12 and 13-year-olds, lo and behold, we have an explosion. Let Bill Maher show you.
Broken down over time, the LGBT population of America seems to be roughly doubling every generation. According to a recent Gallup poll, less than 1% of Americans born before 1946, that's Joe Biden's generation, identify that way. 2.6% of boomers do, 4.2% of Gen X, 10.5% of millennials, and 20.8% of Gen Z. Which means if we follow this trajectory, we will all be gay in 2054. And then who's going to buy this chair? I'm just saying that when things change this much, this fast, people are allowed to ask, what's up with that? All the babies are in the wrong bodies? I'm happy for LGBT folks that we now live in an age where they can live their authentic lives openly. And we should always be mindful of respecting and protecting. But someone needs to say it. Not everything's about you.
Exactly, but we don't live in that era yet. Maybe we'll see what happens in 2058 when everyone is rainbow flagged up. But it's interesting when you take a look at Bill Maher, because he, again, is probably one of the last actual liberals left in this country, especially in the media, who's willing to call balls and strikes when he sees them. And so he has a logical, at least, response, and a reasonable response compared to any of the other arguments we get. But hey, he's probably going to get canceled now because he dared to say that we have the right to say, hey, what's up with that?
I got to tell you for the record, I must be either gay or confused because I would never have bought that chair.
Well,
just saying.
It's a decent chair. I got to see how comfortable it is.
Well, I mean, you know.
Color be damned.
Well,
I'm colorblind, so I don't know about you.
You're not allowed to be in this day and age, are you? Although it's not quite like Martin Crane's chair from Frasier, but it did have those cup holders. We do have Gallup survey information to back this up. Roughly 21% of Generation Z, Americans who have reached adulthood, those born between 1970, 97, and 2003, identify as LGTB. That's 21%. That is nearly double the proportion of millennials who do feel the same way, while the gap widens even further when compared with older generations. Abigail Schreier, meanwhile, reports a 1,000-fold increase in trans identification. Reactions to these trends have varied, and so I think Bill Maher is exactly right. Is this the chicken or the egg? Which one comes first? Is this all of a sudden, because we've become absolutely amoral when it comes to sexuality, that you're getting all of these different sexual identifications? Or is it that you're grooming kids to believe that because all the juice in the room, all the pats on the head, all the gold stars go to kids who are non-binary or gay or bisexual? Are you grooming kids to believe this way, or is this natural? And I think the obvious answer for me is there's no way in the world these numbers are accurate. What you're seeing is kids chasing attention. It's become faddish and modish. You're cool and on the inside if you're something other than what you are. I think this is completely suggestible.
Well, if you take a look at various surveys that have been done, the General Social Survey, it shows, as you can see looking at it, the sexual orientation and sexual behavior. Now, this is what you need to look at, is their orientation versus their actual behavior for under 30s by year. Well, back in 2008, about 5% of Americans under the age of 30 had identified as LGBT, and a similar number had a same-sex partnership in that year. Okay, jump ahead here to 2021. Now, the proportion of those identifying as LGBT had increased 11 points, now up to 16.3%, but the share reporting same-sex relations had only risen 4 points to 8.6%. Okay, so they're saying, yeah, I'm LGBT, has gone up significantly, but actually behaving and sexual behavior as LGBT is not as high. So it is, then you could argue, it's trendy, it's a fad, it's cool. I got to write in my with my pronouns and everything else, I need to say that I'm LGBT.
And this is not surprising at all. If you know anything about the sociology of male and female development, it's not surprising that young women tend to be more suggestible than men. The trend towards greater LGBTQ identification has been particularly pronounced for young women, among whom there are 3 bisexuals for every lesbian in the 28-21 period. Among young men, on the other hand, gays outnumber bisexuals, and the LGBT total is only half as large as it is for women. And so I know this as being a teacher of young people. I taught high school for a little bit, taught very young freshmen in college. The suggestibility for my young female students is much higher. They are much more likely to engage in groupthink. They're much more likely to be concerned to be part of groups that are seen to be in. Now, they outgrow that. I mean, I'm not saying by the time they're adults that this problem necessarily exists continually, but it's certainly at the ages where they're being exposed to this stuff, it's much more about attention and belonging than it is conviction.
And that makes sense, because you say, like, if you look at that last graph we just had up with the share of the bisexual men under 30 who actually have only had male partners. So, like, I'm bisexual, yet I'm actually not. But I just say I am, but I'm really not. And it's a clear trend line.
And I think with
women, trend line.
I really think with young girls and with young women, they want so desperately not to be seen as excluding anybody. They want to be in their own minds. They're open to bisexuality, which means they don't despise it. But the idea that they would actually engage in bisexual relationships, for most of them, that doesn't happen.
They are more so people pleasers who want to go with what is happening. And if they're all on the college campus, here's what you find out. You find out how their ideology aligns with this behavior as well. And if you look at, again, this is all under 30, so we're thinking more of the college age student here. The LGBT share by the ideology, you can make a clear connection to if you are a liberal or very liberal, you are more likely to be behaving or, I guess, identifying as LGBT. If you're very liberal, I mean, some of these surveys, you're in high 40s, almost 50% in one of the surveys. Even if you're slightly liberal, another 25%. If you're looking that specific, as you see the orange bar is actually from the FIRE survey that was done. And 49 plus 25, you're looking at 74% of people who say they're LGBT are on the left. Now, if you look at the moderates, then they're just under 20%, and then it's the people who identify as being slightly conservative or very conservative. Obviously, their percentages are much, much lower in saying that they are part of LGBT.
And the irony is, a nice slice of all those demographics aren't having sex outside of what they are primarily. So they identify in these things, but they're not necessarily pursuing that. This goes back to a conversation, and something I've always noted. I've been in colleges for the last 30 years. I have met over my 30-year college career a lot of women who are lesbian by choice. In other words, I've met a lot of women who were so feminist, they may be heterosexual, they're just not going to sleep with men because men are pigs. And so what relationships they do have tend to be gay or bisexual. I have never in my life met a single man who said that. I have never in my life met a single professor or a male who said, you know what, I don't like women because of their politics, so I'm going to become gay. I have never encountered that. And I think that truth, the underlying truth of that statement, underlies, again, what we're seeing in these graphs.
Well, we have a lot more to say on this. Stay tuned.
With all the censorship taking place on social media platforms, we've made it easy to keep up with your favorite content. Simply download the Freedom Project Media app in your app store. Get access to 18 new videos a week, plus thousands of archived shows, lecture series, and educational animations. Download the Freedom Project Media app on your Apple TV, Roku, tablet, or phone, and make sure you allow for notifications to keep you informed.
And we've been talking at the college level, or the ones that are under 30, but what about going down a little bit more into the high school students? How are they doing with the basically, as we were seeing, the rising number of LGBTQ youth who are talking about it kind of being a dash of trendiness, as what we've been seeing. And the thing that we're finding is, how does that help or hurt their mental state? And as we see just by this graph, the percent of high school students who feel persistently sad or hopeless, the number is, I guess, on the rise overall, all demographics. But if you take a look specifically at that blue line, which is the outline line, it represents the LGBT students who, I mean, the fact that in 2015, this is when we first really, I guess, started taking a look at it, the data from the CDC, it was 60.4% of LGBT students who feel sad or hopeless. It's up to 75.7% in 2021. And you're going to say, well, Katie, I mean, COVID and all this. But this has been going on since before COVID, and the percentage has been rising. Why is that?
Well, I can tell you clearly from my perspective what's going on. It's the fact that we are pretending, because it's that chicken and the egg thing, which came first. This idea that the reason that transgenders and homosexuals are more likely to kill themselves is because society doesn't accept them. This graph shows that that's not true. These are people who are mentally unstable, they're deeply depressed, they're not happy with their lives. They are more vulnerable to being pushed and maneuvered into LGBTQ lifelines, even including radical transformations, because of their radical unhappiness. So here's the point. This is a mental health issue. I know you're not allowed to say that some of this transgenderism and some of this explosion in all these alternative sexualities, you're not allowed to really say that this is a mental disorder, but there's no other way you can interpret this graph. That these are children who are, if not dysphoric, certainly severely depressed. And why at record rates do they identify as LGBTQ? Because those are being presented them as the most happy, inclusive, perfect people in the country. Everybody else is bigoted. Everybody else has problems, not them.
And we talked about how the under 30s, looking at females specifically. Well, look at the graph. The next line down from if you are LGBT is female. Yep. Female has the next highest percentage with a 56.5%. And you look then, well, what about those males? They're the lowest. I mean, it's still sad to have any of these teenagers, high school students, saying that they are persistently sad or hopeless. But it's not the men who are doing it. And of course, then the argument comes back of, well, of course, the men, because they get everything. But females are more influenced, more easily influenced.
And it's been a long time. You and I are both in the education game. There's been a long time since the white male was the standard of excellence and coolness in the public schools.
This is true.
That's been gone for quite a while. You would think, actually, with over the last 20 years, how targeted white men have become, how mocked and dismissed and blamed the young white men have been for every evil in the world. You would think they were the ones going through transphobic experimentation and depressed as all hell. You'd think they were the ones, but nope, that's not what the numbers show us.
Well, and the numbers are showing us just what's happening at, what used to be something that was a standard of excellence at the college level at Harvard, where there was a recent survey done by the Harvard Crimson, their student newspaper, and it found that more than 1/4 of the class, the incoming class of 2025, is identifying as LGBTQ+. According to the data, 27% of the incoming freshman class is something to do with the bisexual, gay, lesbian, questioning, blah, 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 alphabet soup. 27%. Now, since we're all about equity, equality, but not equality, because only equity, so diversity, inclusion, and all that other stuff. If you take a look at the national data, a Gallup poll said that 7.1% of the U.S. population identifies as alphabet soup. So we have some overrepresentation here at Harvard, and so obviously we need to kick out a lot of those students.
Yeah, they're overrepresented.
2/3 of that 27% need to go so that they can be more inclusive to let all those other students who apparently don't identify as LGBTQ alphabet soup. It's only fair.
And the reason Harvard has almost 4 times as many is because they solicit them. Because they go out of their way to make it clear that if you may be one of the best and the brightest, but if you're a little bit gay, you go to the top of the list, right? Hell, you could even have slightly lower achievement levels than the typical Harvard kid. And as long as you're transgender, as long as you're bisexual or gay or any of those things, right away your social credit score at Harvard soars through the roof. So Harvard is denying high-achieving Asian kids because there are too many of them at Harvard, but they're overrepresenting LGBTQ kids. Now, how do you explain that in a court of law? You really couldn't, which is why Harvard, if it were to be dragged into court across the board, and there's litigation going on right now on behalf of Asian kids who are being denied access to Harvard simply because they're too smart. You'd like to be able to see how it's not just how they're discriminating against Asians, but how they are discriminating for LGBTQ kids, because the whole thing is skewed on both sides.
Today's show is sponsored by our friends at MyPillow. Save up to 66% on all items at MyPillow.com when you use the code Dr. Duke. That's DRDUKE. Support this show by supporting a great American company.
And all of this alphabet soup that's been happening, it's happening at our schools and it's happening with our youngest of students. This time we have an example of the gender identity and sexual activities being presented on our 7th graders. And this time it was in Averill Park, New York, where we have at least one mom stood up to the school board to say, why is this being given to my 7th grader?
These are 12, 13-year-olds that are being asked who they're attracted to sexually and what their, pronouns are, and stunning to me.
Averill Park parent Amanda Farinelli says what's stunning is this quiz that she and several other parents tell CBS 6 was given to a 7th grade Family and Consumer Sciences, or FACS, class. Another district parent provided these photos to us that they say are of some of the questions, featuring terms including pansexual, non-binary, cisgender, and intersex. Farinelli says she found out from other parents.
Question 1 starts off with, did you know there are folks out there that have little to no sexual attraction to anyone? Again, I will ask, why are we pushing so hard in this district to desensitize our children to sex?
Board member Doug Kelly later responds to the concerns.
That's not something you would necessarily see in a curriculum, by the way. Those are materials that are produced by a teacher to implement the curriculum. And I'd like to see the context in which that was presented.
I definitely would appreciate the school letting us know and giving us the opportunity to opt out. In this case, I know that the parents were given the opportunity to opt their kids out and given the quiz anyway.
What, you hear that last part? They were given the opportunity to opt out and given the quiz anyway. And before we get to, it's New York, let's just remember this is Averill Park, New York. Population 1,466. So when we say all this stuff is just happening in the big cities, or even in the smaller cities, or even in only on the West Coast, East Coast, not here in middle of nowhere, this happened in middle of nowhere, New York. So it could happen at your school. And
what is really, really disturbing is that there's such a class for a 7th grader to take called Family and Consumer Science. Get out of here. This is middle school. You should be taking math and science, not consumer science for the family. What this is social emotional learning right here. This is how SEL has transformed what used to be an academic curriculum into one long sociological screed that allows teachers to fulfill the curriculum. You heard what that school board member said, right? that this is not something that's not necessarily in the curriculum. It's not written down. It's something that teachers feel like they have to do to successfully teach the curriculum. So there's a gap there between what your moms and dads are seeing and what the teachers are bringing into the classroom because they think they have to do this. Get back to traditional classes. Every time you see a class like that, you better see SEL, social emotional learning, and you better realize that these are nothing more than vehicles to indoctrinate your children.
And of course, we have to give the proper response, as the district always does. The activity in question was not a survey or a quiz. It was an impromptu activity that was done in response to student interest. The activity was in recognition of Pride Month, which is June. The activity was publicly available from a software company, which is used in middle and high schools throughout the country. All of that as a district response says exactly why none of it should have happened, because it was not in the curriculum. It was just a response to a student interest, and it was about Pride Month. Why can't we just have Education Year instead of Pride Month? Why just have Education Year like you're supposed to be doing as a teacher?
And the school explained it. They never once apologized for it.
You know, around here we like education content, and that is our primary focus. But before we go, let's leave you with some other stories that are worthy of just one or two comments. And we're going to start down under, where a popular restaurant in Sydney, Australia is looking to supersize, but the nanny state is standing in their way. Here are the facts. The Golden Arches of McDonald's want to invest $500,000 into renovating their restaurant, which includes expanding the drive-thru lanes. But the local health department isn't having it, citing faster drive-thru service will increase the health problems in the community and drive up obesity. Many locals say this is just government overreach because elected officials in the affluent suburb want fancier restaurants. So the question is, does Mickey D's deserve a break today? See what I did there? You see what I did? Did you see what I did there? Anyway, speaking of McDonald's, let's head to Poland, where it appears the last thing they're worried about is packing on a few extra pounds, especially when it comes to their famed French fries. Take a look.
I'm in Poland at the moment, and I think this may be the biggest portion of McDonald's fries in the world. This is just their medium as well. No, I'm kidding. It's actually a new portion size for them called sharing size. Just look at it. It's wonderful.
Michael Jamieson is a British food blogger who stumbled across the larger-than-life sharing fries in Poland. Now, Michael posted his recent discovery on TikTok, and ironically, numerous Aussies chimed in as the sharing fries were recently removed from all McDonald's in Australia. It probably had something to do with all the obese people crowding the drive-thru lanes or something. Now, Duke, I want to get your thoughts on the family sharing fries.
Well, first of all, I will go back to that first story. This is good news for people like me. All I have to do when I'm going to McDonald's for lunch every day is drive through the narrower driveway, and I'm going to lose weight, right? According to that logic. And show the picture of those fries again. It reminds me of the big Crayola box of crayons. Nobody needs 128 crayons, but boy, we sure want them, don't we?
Hey, different moods call for different colors. Now, speaking of healthy options, here's a story meant for us Wisconsinites. Famed cheesemaker Velveeta has decided to try their hand at nail polish. Yes, Velveeta nail polish makes sense. The company is releasing a limited edition 2-cheese scented polish. Finger food is bright red and La Dolce Velveeta is a creamy yellow. The collaboration also includes a set of Velveeta-themed nail stickers featuring gooey cheese graphics and the phrases creamy and drip. So if you're a cheese lover and you got $15 to invest in your creamy nails, simply visit nailsinc.com to get started. Duke, should we place your order now? Did I maybe already get you something for Christmas? I don't know, maybe.
If Gwyneth Paltrow can create a candle that smells like her vagina, I'll take the Velveeta cheese smelling fingernails any day of the week. Please.
Thankfully, that wraps up this segment. More to come next time.
For all of us here at Freedom Project, please stay educated and stay away from that scented candle, please, my friends.